I am a pretty big believer that until the pain of your sin is greater than the reward of living without it, most people don't make a move. Any improvements I've made just on a spiritual or emotional level have been because my heart was changing. Yeah, maybe my heart needs to change here as well with pornography. Maybe there's more going on than I realized. And that's really when my life began to change. Porn addiction and all sexual issues at a core level are intimacy issues. We're ultimately trying to resolve this fundamental need for intimacy. And so AI is providing this kind of very intimate experience in a way that is manicured to exactly our want.
God intended sex and sexuality to be sacred gifts, but what about those of us who've experienced more sexual pain than celebration? My name is Matt Klein, and I'm your host. Welcome to the Exposed Life Show, where we explore God's true design for sexuality, bring darkness to light, and discover Jesus at the center of it all. Let's go. Here today with Sathiya, my brother. I love you, Sathiya, and seeing what you do for so many guys around the world. You've got such a great business that you've built over the last few years, and I'm excited to chat today. So thanks for joining us to talk about the current landscape of pornography in this world.
Thanks for having me, man. You know, I love everything that you do. You brought so much value to my clients the last little bit, especially with some of the new stuff that God's birthed in you. So it's always just a treat to be together and to chat a little bit.
Yeah, no, it is a treat. So you're the host of the Man Within podcast, and I know you're getting recognized all over the place, and people are excited to talk to Sathiya when they get a chance. And it's just because your heart is gold. You built Deep Clean over the last few years. What's it been? 5 years, 6 years? How long you been building Deep Clean?
Yeah, 5 years full time. It started in 2018, so I guess it's been around for about 8 years now.
Okay, 8 years, man. That's crazy. Time flies.
Yeah, you started before me, right? That means so you've probably approaching 10 years there if you haven't crossed it yet.
That's right, almost. Yeah, I started about a year before that.
Wow.
Restored Ministries. So we're on the journey together. And yeah, you had a chance to come out here to Edmonton. It was funny. You were speaking at a conference, but it was at my church, and we got to hang out. And
Yeah.
and just seeing like the response and the vulnerability was pretty awesome. And guys obviously wanted to get your book and learn more about Deep Clean. But why did you start this? Like what led you to starting Deep Clean, to starting the podcast, or writing your book? Take us through that.
Yeah, I mean, all of this is birthed out of my own struggle. I think, are you a PK? You
I
pastor's
am,
kid?
yeah, I'm a PK.
Yeah. I thought we had that in
Yeah.
common. Yeah, so we're both PKs. You know, I mean, it goes pretty deep in my family. My grandfather was a PK, or sorry, was a pastor rather. But yeah, I mean, he was a PK as well because his dad was also a pastor. So, anyways,
Same here.
Yeah, it goes way up. My parents sent me to Christian school, and it was in the computer lab of my Christian school where I first got exposed to pornography. Still remember the day, still remember the moment. I mean, it was back in the day when we had computer labs. It was a long time ago. It was 2001. You know, my buddy, he played very high level soccer as you could play for an 11-year-old, 12-year-old, and he was like, "Hey, my soccer friend told me to check out this site." I think he had already checked it out and knew what it was in hindsight, but he kind of presented it like, "Oh, it's this new site. Let's check it out." And then, sure enough, it was nothing crazy, but it was enough just to plant a little seed. You know, I didn't get hopelessly addicted the next day. I was actually prepubescent, so you know, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. I was kind of confused. It was that mixture of emotions, like this is really amazing and interesting, and also this is kind of disgusting and weird. And I was sheltered, you know, so I had never seen anything like that before. But then, you know, I did hit puberty, and your hormones change, and you get more curious, and just little by little, I start to kind of dabble in pornography. I went back to the same site, and one site leads to another, and I start to build a ritual around it. And, you know, I knew the times when my parents were around and when they weren't. And we had one family computer. It was always in a public place. They did that part right. And it still wasn't enough, you know, because when you want to find a way, you will. By the time I was in university, I was basically just planning my days around it. Very high achieving academically, so I'd skipped a grade. Had 5 figures in research grants, and I was doing research. I was, you know, working hard to get good grades, volunteering. I had a part-time job, and the only way I really knew how to cope with all my stress was pornography. And in the middle of this kind of academic achievement and pursuit is where I really met the Lord. I had been in church. I was still active in church, but I mean, obviously, I'm sure you went through this as well. Like at some point, the torch gets passed, you know, from one to the next, and you're no longer just going to church because your parents make you. You have to decide, do I actually want to go to church? And there was a season where I didn't, you know, I didn't really go much. But out of this time, I found the Lord, and I knew right away that I needed to, stop getting drunk on the weekends with my buddies. I needed to clean up my language, and I needed to quit watching pornography. And the first two were easy money. And the third, I could not figure out for the life of me. And that's really where Deep Clean started. It was realizing just how damaging pornography is. Nobody warned me about it. Nobody talked to me about it. And certainly there weren't places like Restored Ministries or the Exposed Life podcast that were helping people understand that, number one, there's nothing wrong with them for having this issue. But number two, hey, let me show you some biblical, practical ways to actually walk out in freedom. And so I had always kind of told myself in the back of my head, like, man, if I can figure this out, I would love to do everything I can to help as many other guys as possible figure it out as well. That journey took a lot longer. So this is like 2011, I think, where I had given my life to God, and I'm trying to figure this pornography thing out. I didn't quit pornography fully until February 2016. It was 5 years of gritting my teeth, and the first 3 years, we were talking before we hit record about, you look back at content you created when you first started and how sometimes it's very cringy. You look at yourself, you're like, oh, it's so bad. What was I doing? It still blesses people, so praise God. But I feel that way about my early recovery journey too. I look at the first 3 years and I kind of cringe. What was I doing? Like, I was so stupid. Things that made sense and were logical, but didn't really actually lead to any freedom. I did eventually find the stuff that works. And once I figured out that's when I really knew, okay, I need to help other people. So I quit porn in 2016. I waited a couple years. I had longer bouts of freedom. And I know that's part of your story as well. And I had fallen back into it. And it felt different, but it always feels different. You don't really know until enough time passes. But I had enough time pass, and I felt like God kind of released me end of 2018 to start Deep Clean. And then, yeah, the rest is history. It started very innocent and just trying to see if we could help people. And we've been able to build a global brand and reach a lot of people and start to pioneer a message about, getting to the roots of the issue, which is not a new message. I didn't come up with that, but I think I've been able to maybe make it a little bit more popular with the people we have some influence over. So that's the story in a bit of a nutshell.
Yeah, 100%. So I want to talk to you about AI. I want to talk to you about OnlyFans. I want to talk to you about the current landscape of pornography. But I'm curious, looking back at the cringy things that you did. I look back at my life too, and I think the same thing. I haven't used the word cringy, but that's a good word. I'm like, what was I doing? I really knew nothing, but it helps me actually put myself in the shoes of people now, and a lot of people that
Yes.
are out there and struggling. I also did that, or I also thought that, or said that. What were some of the things that you tried that made sense to you, that are seemingly logical but didn't really work?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm a left brain analytical numbers guy. So instinctively, I just got obsessed with the streak, just counting streaks. How many days could I string together? And the reason that's so futile is because at some point, the implication of a streak is that it ends, right? Like, you and I, we love hockey, right? So, Nathan McKinnon's on a hot streak and he's scoring 2-3 goals a game. He's not going to keep, everyone's like, oh, he's on pace for 80 goals this season. But we all know he's not actually going to score 80 goals because it's a streak. At some point, it's going to end and he's going to come back to reality.
Great way to put it.
Yeah, so the streak is the same. It's the same concept. We all know it's going to end at some point. And the problem is not just that it ends. The problem is that when it does end, everybody does this tailspin. We do this nosedive into like, oh, back to square one. Woe is me. I'm never going to quit. So I think that was a huge mistake I made in the beginning. I was just trying to figure out how long could I push this streak. And what happens in the process is you will shortcut everything. So you'll hear Matt Klein tell you that, you need to really focus on building intimacy with Jesus, and you need to slow down a little bit and learn how to process and regulate. But that all sounds like it takes time, and there's so much effort and cost involved in that. Why wouldn't I just kind of try to willpower my way through this thing and see how long I could push the streak? So I think that was one thing I did that I feel very remorseful about now, and I wish I wouldn't have done it. But what you did say is very true, because I would say anytime I talk about streak counting with my audiences, whether it's email or Instagram or wherever, we always get a massive response, because I think I'm not the only guy that's left brain that's thinking, yeah, let me just push the number as high as I can, right? I think the other thing I did, and I tell this story very often, is in my excitement, and installed an internet filter, but it wasn't just an ordinary internet filter, Matt. It was the kind of filter that had an accountability partner baked into it. So you have your direct report, and if you watch anything at the end of a week, they get a report of, hey, here's all the sites that Sathiya watched. You might want to go check in on him. And I think maybe there's a world where that kind of a model has some value, but the person that I had set this up with was also struggling with pornography.
Yeah,
And so
98% of the time.
yeah, exactly. So it
Yeah.
was literally the blind leading the blind. And the first couple weeks, it was like, here's the report of what Keith struggled with this week or what he watched. And you're like, okay, oh, wow, that's a pretty long list. And you just archive the email. Like I just tried to get out of there in a hurry because I knew the temptations were going to come.
And then you're like,
It,
bro, don't look at my report. You might struggle too. It might might tempt you if you're in this.
yeah, exactly. By the way, sorry about the report this week, and then, but sure enough, like probably 5, 6 weeks in, like I'm clicking on the links and I'm like, oh, who's this person he was checking out? I've never heard of her. And
Like,
it got really, really bad. And so again, that one I don't look at with as much disdain because I did that with innocence and truthfully, like with really good intent. I was not trying to shortcut at that point. I just legitimately thought this is the only solution out there if you're trying to quit pornography. And so I had no problem spending the money on the software, and I was very eager to have like open conversations with Keith. It's just that we wound up just triggering each other and we didn't really have any meaningful conversations because we didn't really know how to. So those are some of the cringy things that I did in the beginning.
okay, is there any place for the software for the filters?
Tough question. So I think my short answer is yes. Now I don't have the software and I did not have the software when I quit porn. If somebody comes into our program and they say, "Hey, I have a software. I know you speak against the softwares. Do I need to remove it?" I say no. For now. So I just say keep it. Let's work on the core issues, and then we'll talk through a plan on how to remove this thing strategically, because it's if you don't have any sugar in your house for a year, and then all of a sudden you're allowed to have sugar back in, you have to do that with some intentionality, because if you just fill your pantry with chocolate bars and your ice cream your fridge with ice cream, it's probably not going to go super well for you. You probably have to control that or titrate it a little bit. All my science is coming out now because I started talking about research. But yeah, so you have to be a little bit more methodical about it. But if you're starting with me and you don't have an internet filter, then I just say keep it off. I don't think you need it to get the results.
Yeah, yeah. So the mistake that I made with the software is that that's all I did, right? And that's what a lot of people
Mhm.
do. It's like if there's a place for it, it's kindergarten or grade one, and then people stop there. And it's like, no, we want you to graduate, right?
Yes.
You got to put other things in place. You got to learn some different things, but if there's a place for it, it's at least a starting point, not the end goal. For me, it was the end point of my
Hmm.
journey. The street counting thing, it's so good. When you look biblically at what the Lord says about sin, he says it's already crucified, or he says like you should crucify it. And so it's dead. When we're counting it, it's like we're keeping it alive.
Yeah.
And I remember with this one guy after an event, he came to me, he's talking about a streak. Like, should I streak count? I'm like, you know what you probably don't do? He's like, you probably don't, or I said, you probably don't count how many days in a row you've read the Bible, count how many days in a row you've prayed with the Lord. And he's like, oh my gosh, I haven't. The streak counting, it's all about our sin rather than about
Yeah.
moving forward with the Lord. And it's like, where's your eye trained, right? It's all on the sin
Yes.
and
Yeah.
hoping that it goes on to infinity. But I love how you said the streak is meant to end, which is true.
Yeah. So the one thing we do is, and we should get into this when we start talking more about AI, but we do have people track their progress. And it's not just like, did I watch porn? Yes or no, but it's also they track any triggers that came up and that sort of stuff. Because, for us, we find that that's very useful information later on when we're trying to understand why you're watching pornography in the first place. So one thing we do, we're like, okay, look, if you're going to track every day and you want a number to pay attention to, we call it the trend. And so the one thing we say is like, forget the streaks, but if the trend is moving in the right direction, then you can be assured that the work you're doing is probably taking root, because that is a difficult thing for somebody who is left brain and wants the numbers and wants some indicator of progress. It's difficult when you're doing root work because it's not like once you do XYZ, that's when the roots are healed or that you're good to go. It's not as quantifiable. The trend gives you an indicator of like, okay, at least things are moving in the right direction. So I'll give you an example. So we had a client, his name was Jameis. He's given me permission to use his name. Jameis, month one of our program, he tracks and he has 23 days where he watches pornography. So if he's street counting, Sathiya is a heretic. He's a scam artist. Guy doesn't know what he's talking about, right? But we're just like, hey, just stay with us. He was really plugged into the community. Like he didn't have any issues. That's not the number that most people are looking for month one, but we just said it's fine. You're good. We don't really talk about it. It's just kind of floating in the background. So month two, it's 18. So okay, it's trending in the right direction, but you still, that's still like a lot of pornography viewing for someone who's in a quit porn program. Month three, 8. Month four, 5. And so you can kind of see, like, if we zoom out a little bit and we actually look at the trend, this is going in the right direction. And I love what you said. Like, you don't want to make it a focal point. It's not like every time we gather, we're like, okay, everybody open up your progress tracker. Whose trend is moving in the right way? But it's a nice thing that you can look at every 6 weeks or every month and be like, okay, this month the number went in the right direction, and just continue to focus on, the other things that we know are actually going to get to the heart of the matter. And for him, like, I think by month 6 he was at 0, and he hasn't looked back. So I think if you are going to track a number, we recommend you track trends, and that at least gives you some indicator numerically of what's going on.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
It's true. So what changed for you? You got through the cringe phase, and then
Yeah.
you ultimately found freedom. What changed for you?
There's this great scripture, guard your heart above all else, for from it flow the issues of life, Proverbs 4:23. And I knew that, I've known that scripture for a long time. And I think about the reason I used to drink and get drunk with my friends was I was looking for approval. I was looking for acceptance. Alcohol did nothing for me as far as like an addiction thing goes, but it was much more about the social element. And I knew that. And that was actually part of the reason it was easy to quit alcohol, is because when I gave my life to Jesus, I was starting to find my worth and my value in him. I didn't feel that fear of man the way I used to. I still felt it, but it was a 2 out of 10 instead of a 10 out of 10. So I had experienced this in other areas of my life. I just, for some reason, I didn't translate it to quitting pornography. And I think it's because so many of the messages I got about quitting porn were just stop. Like, if you're starting with porn, just stop. I call them the just stop bros. And it's like it's so easy. Like, all you have to do is just quit, and that's all there is to it. And again, there is some merit of, like, you do have to make a conscious decision, and all that, but there's a bit of a process there. I think for me, once I start to realize, okay, I got to the heart of the issue, and that helped me give up drinking. Any improvements I've made just on a spiritual or emotional level have been because my heart was changing. Yeah, maybe my heart needs to change here as well with pornography. Maybe there's more going on than I realized. And that's really when my life began to change. And I had a couple things that really helped. I think one was building emotional awareness. I lost 3 friends to suicide in high school, all within the span of about a year and a half.
That's wild.
And yeah, it was crazy. One was really close, and the other 2 were friends, not super close friends, but friends nonetheless. And I basically just learned emotions are too much to handle. It's better to just stuff them. And so I became really good at suppressing. And on the outside, it kind of looked like I was just invincible, like nothing really bothered me. But it was all there. I was just so disconnected and detached from it. I did not realize everything was kind of like building up. So emotional awareness was a big thing. And then sorry, to finish that thought, the buildup or the outburst would manifest in these massive porn binges. So pornography was really the only outlet I had. It was the only time I really felt like I could feel something, was when I viewed pornography. It's kind of weird. But it makes sense once you understand why you're watching it. So building that emotional awareness was super important. Addressing, I would call it, wounds of the past, areas that affected me. Like, my relationship with my mom was a really big one, where, like, she's an amazing woman of God. But we just had some differences in how we expressed love, how I wanted to receive love, some of those things that left me hollow. And instead of, finding Jesus to meet that need, I was seeking women and I was seeking pornography. So that was another big part of it. And then I think the third thing was the identity piece. I had really beaten myself up because of how much pornography I'd watched, and not just how much porn I'd watched, but how many times I tried to quit and didn't quit. Like, it kind of just destroys your confidence after a while. And you start to just write these stupid theologies like, oh, maybe this is my thorn in the flesh, and like all this kind of stuff. And so I was deep into that, and there were some core lies there about, not just about me, but about who God was and who God was for me, that were keeping the sin insulated in my life. And so those are some of the core tenets, and that's what deep clean is. That's the deep clean system. It builds self-awareness, heal your heart, and shift your identity. We kind of built the model around my experiences, because that's when the needle really started to move forward. And for 3.5 years, I spun my tires trying to quit porn. And then probably about 18 months starting to kind of fumble my way through these 3 processes is how I ultimately found freedom.
I love it, man. I love it. It starts with scripture, and you become aware, and you become healed, and you become whole. And I love it, because it's such a deep, thorough process that you've been through. And it doesn't just lead you out of porn. It changes you as a man, changes you as
Yes.
a husband, changes you as a leader. It's
Yeah.
pretty awesome, which is why 1 Thessalonians 4 talks about it's his will that you be sanctified. So abstain from sexual immorality, learn to control your body with holiness and honor. It's all about, like, the process of learning how to abstain sanctifies you completely. That's what you just described, is like you become more like Jesus. You become more like who he made you to be in the
Yeah.
process, which is so much greater than what we think. Because when we're in it, we're like, I got to quit this thing. But when you actually get out of it, you're like, wow, the process of getting out of it, that actually changed me holistically. Would you agree?
Oh, 100%. 100%. We always say, like, even with deep clean, I think the carrot we dangle in front of everyone is we're gonna help you quit porn.
Yeah.
But they all come out just being like, I had no idea how much my life was gonna change.
Yeah.
Like we have a client, he joined us, I think, in November. He actually is doing pretty well with pornography, but he has this recurring like nighttime, whatever you want to call it, like dream fantasy, and he wakes up and he just can't help himself. Like he masturbates, and that's language he's used in the past. Like, I can't help myself. It's this uncontrollable thing, and it's a very similar recurring fantasy. And as we start to kind of dive into it, the thing that he realized is that the fantasy is all about control. It's just about him gaining control. And so it very quickly the conversation shifts to,
Yeah.
where do you feel powerless in your life, or what else is controlling you? And what's wild is that what has surfaced in those conversations is he is part of a very controlling church culture. And he's been in this church for 19 years, served faithfully, but he has said, he's like, people have left this church before and they do not come back. They get cut off immediately. Like, there are some, there's some not so healthy elements to his church experience, and he never in a million years ever thought that he would leave that church. And just probably about a month ago, he kind of said his goodbyes. He had to do it in a very specific way so that he wouldn't get ostracized, basically.
Yeah.
But again, and he just said, like, he's like, I if you told me I was going to sign up for Deep Clean, and 4 months later I was going to be leaving this church plant that I was a part of from day one for the last 19 years, he's like, I would not have imagined in a million years. But that's just the journey of heart transformation. Is, the Lord starts to surface things, he starts to remove things, he starts to add things. And yeah, hopefully the goal is not just I quit pornography. Again, I think we could go back to street counting and internet filters if we really wanted to do that for, any decent period of time. But what we're talking about here is actually eternal, right? It's eternal in nature.
Totally.
And so if that's what this is about, it has to be about transformation.
Hey, I'm just popping in here mid-episode to say I hope you're loving this content. And if you have a desire for healthy sexuality in your own life, like this video and subscribe to the channel to keep this content flowing. Now let's get back to it. I love it. I love it. So let's switch gears to the current landscape. So there's AI porn, and that's obviously starting to grow a lot and kind of take off. Unfortunately, there's OnlyFans, which has been pretty big. I don't know if it's surpassed the old traditional, so to speak, type of pornography, but it's sure getting there. And
Yeah.
people are getting caught up in this new way of pleasuring themselves and comfort. So what would you say first about AI porn? Like, what's your general view on how that's impacting people right now?
Yeah, I mean, AI just it's a fascinating subject. I think that what was interesting about the big porn sites of the last, call it, like 10 to 15 years, is that they offered a very manicured experience. Like, you could find the most obscure, strangest, most bizarro stuff if you looked deep enough into whatever, some kind of red tube site. So I think that was very interesting, and I think it's what kept people coming back, is because your mind starts to wander, you start to have these crazy fantasies, and then you kind of wonder, like, I wonder if there's a video, of somebody doing this. And sure enough, there's thousands of videos because anybody can upload their content. So what AI has done now is it's taken this kind of custom manicured experience to a completely different level, because now you can build the exact experience you want with the exact people you want in the exact way that you want it. I was just talking to a guy on Instagram who has been taking this, basically he's got a crush on this girl. He asked her out. She said no, but he's already so deep in his fantasies about her and everything else that now he's just taking pictures of her. He's actually taking clips of her and he's generating these videos of her, doing whatever it is for him to kind of get his kicks. And he obviously, he knows it's wrong or he wouldn't be talking to me about it. But this kind of depth of experience is making people very bonded. And again, like I always say, porn addiction and all sexual issues at a core level are intimacy issues. Like, we're ultimately trying to resolve this fundamental need for intimacy, to be seen, known, to be loved, accepted for who we are, to have that close connection with another person. And so AI is providing this kind of very intimate experience in a way that is manicured to exactly our wants. And I think that's going to make it very difficult in the days ahead to quit or to resist. So I think that's kind of the first layer of what AI is providing. I think the second thing is people are and this is where OnlyFans comes in. People don't just want content now; they also want communication. And so, what's appealing about OnlyFans? It's not just that I get what kind of feels like a bit more of a private experience because I'm in this room with the person, but there's a chat, right?
Yeah.
And the chat is the real money of OnlyFans because it feels like you're getting this experience with that person. Again, you're forming an intimate connection or what feels like an intimate connection with that individual, and that is the real addiction. The real addiction here is the connection and it's the intimacy. And so even with AI now, I'm sure they've generated, I couldn't confirm this with a specific platform, but I guarantee you there are AI platforms out there where you can chat and you can talk, and then you can start to tell the AI what your, whatever, what gets you going, what you don't like. It's going to start to learn your preferences and continue to create these very highly manicured experiences. And I'll drive this point home with the story, and then I'd love to hear some of your thoughts, Matt. I had a client come to me. I'm trying to think of the time frame. I guess it would have been probably about a year ago now. He's, mid 50s. He works high up in healthcare, and he had just been beat up. You could see it on his face. Like, the guy was kind of a shell of himself. We have them all do a pretty extensive intake form when they start to work with us. So I'm reading through the form. Okay, multiple affairs. Sounds like COVID was really tough on him, which it was for a lot of people in healthcare. First session, okay, man, story up. Like, what are these affairs all about? What happened? So he starts telling a story about COVID and all the stress, all the pressure, the long hours, some of the fear about his job. Then he starts talking about the first affair, and how it kind of unfolded, and then it ended, and then affair 2 and 3, and they were all very, very similar. And I'm sure you have this feeling too, Matt, where you kind of know that what they're telling you is true, but you also know that you're not getting the full extent of the story. And so I was just kind of like, I was actually trying to ask the Holy Spirit, like, what do I need to ask him? Because something wasn't adding up, and I don't remember what I asked, but it was the right question to ask. And basically what he shared is, he's like, okay, yeah, the affairs were kind of complicated. And I'm like, okay, what does that mean? And he's like, well, they were all online. They were just emotional affairs, which he had disclosed. But he's like, they were all just online. And I found out after every single affair that it was just a chatbot. And I was actually a little bit surprised. I hadn't really heard of that happening to that extent, like for it to happen 3 times.
Yeah.
And he's like, by the third time, I kind of knew what was happening, but I was so desperate. I was so desperate for the connection, and I couldn't find it anywhere else, that I just kind of went with it for a while anyway. And obviously, in the process, like, his wife was devastated, and he had a great turnaround story. We can get into that, but I say that more to illustrate, like, this is the lure. Like, this guy is married. He's got kids. But AI is offering this very customized experience that is very irresistible for someone whose heart is not in a good place.
Yeah. But here's some pushback for you, because in our day, when we'd go to porn sites, we were like, with every click, we're funding that porn site. We're funding the being consumers to the people on screen. With OnlyFans, we're supporting that person in that industry, which is damaging their soul. AI, you're not harming anybody, right? That could be
Mm,
a belief for us. This is
yeah.
innocent. I'm literally not hurting anybody. What do you say to that?
That's good pushback. Well, I think you count, you the viewer. So I think we can start there. I think, what's the impact it has on you. That's my favorite, I've had people yell at me before after giving a talk at a church, like, this is between me and God. You have no right. And it's like, well, it's not between you and God. And even if it even if it was, like, how does that justify any kind of immorality anyway? But I think the reality is, the clicks on the porn sites is not, it's never what it was about. The way the porn industry makes their money is through your attention. And we know, I mean, scripture says that, right? That the eyes are the windows to the soul. So whether you're engaging with something sexually immoral, that's AI, or it's a site, or whatever else, you're giving the most valuable resource you have, which is not even your time, it's your attention, to something that is soul sucking and sexually immoral. Again, it's never really been about the medium. There's no medium that makes it justifiable. It's immorality at the end of the day. But at a deeper level, it's poor stewardship of resources. You're giving some of your best and most valuable resources into something that's going to give you nothing back.
Yeah, and resources is not just money, it's time, it's what you talk about, your soul, it's your
Yeah.
body, these are things that God has called us to steward. And I say the same thing. My first response is, I think you matter. It hurts you. If in reality, which is not reality, but if it hurt nobody else, you still
Yeah.
matter.
Yeah.
And I mean, the nature of sex is that through sexual experience, you're bound with another. There's a
Yeah.
binding component to it, both spiritually and scientifically. And
Mm,
when we're binding ourselves to something that's not even a human, I mean, that's, you could say, yeah, it's not with a person, but man, the distortion of God's design and what you were made for is it's so sad to experience. But I like what you talked about with OnlyFans, in that, you can interact with these people. You can interact with them not only on the OnlyFans platform, but you can go to their socials and you can comment or you can DM these
yeah.
people. Can you speak to just to that reality, like how that draws people in a different way than 20, 30 years ago, when it kind of seemed distant, right? We'd see people online, it was like, we don't know who they are, what their name is, can't find them. Now it's like you could go to socials and
Mm.
interact with them. How does that play into people being bound to this darkness?
Yeah, well, you just said it really well a minute ago, which is that the nature of any sexual experience is that it's bonding at a physical, emotional, and spiritual level. And so I think that's what this whole digital ecosystem is providing people now is you get a physical experience to whatever extent it might be physical, and there are very extreme stories of people paying exorbitant amounts of money to have these hookups or these meetups with OnlyFans models. But then I think the social media profiles, even the chat, it all, like I had a former OnlyFans recruiter on my podcast. Her name's Victoria Sin. She's been on the Lecrae podcast and that kind of thing. Very, very interesting. And she was explaining how basically they would manage these OnlyFans models, and so they would help them, get more popularity, get more traction, and every single person they managed had a team of Filipino VAs that are managing the chat, right? So they think they're talking to the model. Of course they're not. It's somebody in the Philippines who's behind the computer managing the chat. So I asked her, what do you train these people on to keep the clients, the customers engaged in what you're doing? Because obviously that's the name of the game, right? The longer they stick around, the more likely they are to pay for a picture or buy something or come back again later. And she said, that is easy. She said, all we have to do is pique their curiosity. All we have to do is pique their curiosity. So she said, so it means like in the chat, we're not like doing like super over, like trying to get them all turned on and riled up. We're saying, like, imagine you and I are at a coffee shop, da 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 da, and we're starting to like engage their imagination and start getting them curious, because we know that's what's ultimately going to keep people tied in and keep people pinned in, keep them coming back again and again. So I think there's nothing that doesn't sound very sexual. That's more emotional, psychological bonding. But they know that that's kind of the bedrock. It's the plumb line. And so I think socials, all that kind of stuff, it gives people the first thing it does is it gives people a chance to deepen that bond. But I would say anything that's off platform is all about getting people back onto platform. So it's kind of like getting stuck in the roundabout. You can't figure out how to kind of get off this thing. That's what I think the socials do, because you go on Instagram because your buddy sent you a DM, but then there she is. She shows up in your explore page, and it gets you distracted just enough and just far enough off the path you intended to, that you forget to DM your buddy. You can't even remember why you got on Instagram in the first place, and now you're kind of planning out when you're going to go back onto OnlyFans. So I think that's part of the strategy behind it as well. Is it's trying to keep you in that perpetual loop.
That should make you mad, hey? That you're not even
It's
talking to the person,
infuriating. Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
if you're the consumer, it's infuriating for all of us. But if you're the consumer and you think that you're talking to this person, and
Yeah.
it's a Filipino VA or it's some old dude in his basement or whatever, like, that should make you mad and add fire to your determination or to your
Yeah.
journey of getting out of this.
Yeah. But to the example of like my client who did this 3 times,
Yeah,
the third time he kind of knew and he still
yeah,
didn't.
exactly.
And again, it just shows you how deceived I think we can be in our sin, that we're stuck in the roundabout. And yeah, we're pretty dizzy, and yeah, we puke every once in a while because the dizziness is uncontrollable. But I've been in this roundabout for so long, I don't think I'm ever really going to get out.
I have some thoughts to that, but why do you think that is? Why do you think, even though it should make us mad, it should give us add fuel to the fire, we
Mm.
keep going back to the filth? Why do you think that is?
Wow, it's a loaded question. I mean, I think back to why I kept going back to it, and I think ultimately there was a huge disconnect in my relationships. I think there were some like um reasonable explanations. Like I didn't really have meaningful connections. And so pornography, like I said, pornography is the one place in my life where I could feel emotions and feel a sense of connection, as pseudo as it might have been. We have probably a plethora of stories of people who had their crap hit the fan moment, right? They got caught on a work laptop, their wife found some piece of content, whatever it is. And I am a pretty big believer that until the pain of your sin is greater than the reward of living without it, most people don't make a move. And that used to really bug me, Matt. That used to really, really bug me. Even as a bit like from a deep clean standpoint of like, we know how many people are out there watching this that know they shouldn't.
Yeah.
Why don't they? Is really frustrating. But then I saw it in my own life. I saw that, okay, maybe not with pornography, like I'm clean of pornography now, but there are, but like I know I should probably be eating a little bit better. I probably have a little bit too much dessert. Everyone, like, there's like, we all know there's things that we should do, but I haven't, nobody's told me I'm pre-diabetic yet. And diabetes runs in my freaking family. Like that day probably is coming sooner than I like it to be. And I still probably am not as careful with that stuff as I should be. So I think there's a bit of some psychology in there of needing the greater pain point. What would you add to that?
Well, I think that there's a grace aspect to it where it goes with what you said. There's a psychology aspect to it. It's how we're made. We're made to seek instant pleasure. When you look at our brains, we look at the way that our emotional makeup is. We're made to seek pleasure. I remember when my firstborn was born, he was a baby, and I'm just like, everything about this guy's life is comfort. Like he's hungry, screams. He's tired, screams. It's like he will scream until he gets comfort.
Yeah.
And I was talking to my best man about it. He's like, "Yeah, that's life, man." He's like, "You grow up, you want the most comfortable house, comfortable car, comfortable." Like,
Yeah.
we, we're literally programmed to pursue comfort. And so, in with this stuff, with the immorality, we go to the instant comfort. And so many of us, where you get hooked on it when we're 11, 12, 13 years old or younger, and our brain is literally wired not just for comfort, but for comfort in this certain area. You look biblically, I mean, the people are like out of Egypt, but then they don't get what they want right away. And they're like, oh, let's go back to slavery in Egypt. It was better
Yeah.
there. There's pleasure, there's food, there's comfort. And it's like,
Yeah.
wow, how damaging is that? But when you look at the fantasy, you got to look like, do you want the pleasure and the comfort of the instant fantasy? Or do you believe that God can provide the deeper soul issues or as you said, the needs of your
Yeah.
heart? When you look at the reality of fantasy, we're looking at like the instant gratification, the pleasure of this sexual fantasy. But if you look really at what the fantasy is telling you, like you're talking about that guy, it's all about control. He wanted peace, he wanted comfort, he wanted freedom from the control. We want peace, we want comfort, we want these things, but we don't yet believe that God can do that. And I remember being about 25 years old and thinking, I remember looking up, I was standing alone in my kitchen, looking up and thinking, like, if I live 60 more years, do I want to live without porn? And the answer was no, because I couldn't fathom any other thing that would give me pleasure and comfort like that. And
Wow.
so I kept going back to it. And I think that, like, I love 2 Timothy 2:22. It says, flee youthful lusts and pursue faith along with other things. But when you look at this, it's like, what an opportunity for us to pursue faith, to grow in faith. So we've got like our current reality of the pleasure and the comfort that we experience. Then there's the quote fantasy or the desire that we have for God to come through, for God to provide the things that we want on a heart level. But the
Yeah.
in between, that's faith. And we don't
Mm,
want that because that's uncomfortable. That's the Israelites escaping Egypt but not being in the promised land yet. And so they'd rather go back to it. And if we can recognize the opportunity to grow in faith and to grow in pursuing Jesus and
yeah.
experiencing him in new ways, even when the fulfillment of our desire isn't quite there, all of
Yeah.
a sudden we can see it differently. And though it's uncomfortable, we can go, okay, I know that God has better things for me. I'm going to grow in faith in this process.
Mm,
And that's part of the sanctification that we talked about earlier, where it's like you're not simply seeking comfort, you're actually growing in faith and becoming more like Jesus in the
man,
process.
that's so
So
good.
yeah, but man, there's a grace component to it because that's how we're made. And so if
Yeah.
a man is stuck there and going, why do I keep going back? Like I've repented 1,000 times. I remember at one event, this guy yelled out, he's like, I'm a pro at quitting. I've quit 1,000 times. It's like, yeah, I can relate to that. And I'm thinking that, like, man, that's how we are. And so I don't want guys beating themselves up if you keep going back to an emotional affair with an AI bot, or if you keep going back to this, don't beat yourself up. Just simply realize, okay, there's a different way of living here, and I can be more led by the Spirit. I can be more aware of my emotions. I can live in faith. But if you keep going back to it, there's no place for beating yourself up, because that will literally keep you there. But
Yeah.
there's a way out. And so, Sathiya, what is that way out? If people are stuck here, how do they get out of the filth? Not just the porn, but the desire for connection and for intimacy that's been perverted so often in their lives.
No, that's a good question. I'm just chewing on what you just said. That was so good. I love the I'll just comment on this and I'll kind of dovetail into my answer. But I love that gap you said. Like there's the like God is our comfort, God is our source of pleasure. And there's all these kinds of counterfeits,
Yeah.
right? And what bridges the gap there is faith. But I think what's so cool as I was thinking about that is scripture says that without faith, it's impossible to please God.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of our core desires as believers is to actually please the Lord and to bring pleasure to his name in what we think and what we say and what we do. So that's such a great visual. I really, really like that.
I love
Um
that. Before you answer, I just want to go off that, because one of the guys I was talking to about a month ago, he's wrestling with things. He's like, man, I keep going to fantasy, I keep having these thoughts, going to these memories, and he's like, what do I do with this, Matt? Like, how do I get free? And I'm wrestling with my self-image, and I don't know what to do. And like, no matter what I desire, I keep going back to this. I'm struggling. And so he was coming at it from a standpoint of, I don't like this. There's something wrong with me. I'm messed up. But I was able to say to him, you know what, brother? When you wrestle with these things and you want to do right by the Lord, I think he loves it. I think
mm,
he looks at his son and he goes, I love my boy. I love him. If
yeah.
you're a woman, I love my daughter, because they're wrestling. And so what if, and I think about that same verse that you brought up, like, what if in that in-between process, you're pleasing the Lord when you're wrestling with all this stuff? You're
Mm,
actually pleasing him when you're trying to grow in faith and trying to grow in understanding. And you
yeah.
don't quite get it all perfectly, but you're wrestling with it because you want the right thing. What if the Lord doesn't see you as some screw up, but he actually sees you with pleasure, and he loves that
Yeah.
you're wrestling, desiring the right thing, and you're in
Mm,
process, and he's got you there because he's faithful? Different way of looking
yeah.
at it. And I think that sometimes, because of our sin and shame and our mistakes, we don't receive God's love, but it's readily available for us to receive.
Man, it's so good. It's so good. I mean, it reminds me of like the I'm trying to remember the exact story, but it's Jesus says this to a father of a child who needs healing. And he says, I believe, but help my
Yeah,
unbelief.
that's good.
Right? And Jesus didn't rebuke him at all, right?
Right.
Like he accepted it, he loved the honesty, and then, he healed his child. So I think there has to be a wrestle. I've certainly worked through that. I think as PKs as well, we always feel this pressure to perfectly believe, to have it all kind of figured out. And I've had so many doubts about my own faith the last few years. Not that I've questioned my salvation, but just like, do I believe this? Why do we do this? Is
Right.
this really the way we're supposed to do it? I don't know if I see this in the Bible. Like, just kind of going through all that, and so many times just falling back on like, yeah, God, I believe, but help my unbelief, because there's so much
Right.
I'm working through here.
I love that.
For somebody who's at this point in the interview, and you're hearing us talk about, getting to the roots and addressing needs, and the dangers of AI and everything else. One thing that I'm having to say to my community quite a bit, and I'll offer it to your community as well for what it's worth, is beware of the hypervigilance. I have some clients where like every single thing that happens in their day, they're retracing back to a traumatic moment in their childhood, or like someone today in one of our group calls was like, I catch myself at the gym sometimes, like I'm looking a little bit too long and whatever, like what should I do? And as I dug deeper, it was like, dude, like I'm not saying that's right and there's nothing wrong with it, but I think you have some other things that are much more important to focus on. Like I'm not holding a magnifying glass to like every single time that you cross that line from attraction to lust. You know what I mean? And you shouldn't either. And so the one thing I would encourage people is like, just take a deep breath. Recovery does take time. Freedom in Christ is a lifetime, right? Salvation is a moment, sanctification a lifetime. We're all in this thing together. And and we're all just trying to get a little bit better every single day. I get a lot of flack for this concept, and if you disagree with it, I welcome you to push back. But it's really helped me gain some perspective on this whole thing about freedom, because freedom is sort of like the core value that drives a lot of what we do at Deep Clean. So we are all free in Christ Jesus, like, period. Yes and amen. There's no commas, there's no ifs, ands, or buts, there's no exceptions. But sanctification is at the same time a lifetime, which means even though we are all fully free, we still have work to be done. There's grave clothes to take off. There's however you want to kind of frame that thing. There's still work to be done. So it's really helped me to rather than thinking of freedom as something binary, like, are you free from porn, yes or no, to look at it as a little bit more of a spectrum. And 10 years ago is when I stopped watching pornography. But 10 years later, even though every single day from that moment, they all look the same on paper on did you watch porn, yes or no, I have way more freedom in my life today than I did 10 years ago. And if you go another 10 years back to when I was rife with a porn addiction, my goodness, I was even further down that spectrum of bondage and slavery and everything else. And so for somebody listening, just understand that your goal is, I think sometimes we feel like we have to leapfrog. We got to take these huge, massive steps towards freedom. For me personally, most of my journey was I got 1% better every single day. And then I looked back 6 months and I thought, son of a gun, look at that. Like, I can go to the gym and not be tempted anymore. That's actually pretty cool. That's new. I don't know when that happened, but it happened somewhere along the way, and praise God. And I'm going to keep moving forward down this spectrum into greater and greater measures of freedom. And if I do things properly, I'd like to think that another 10 years from now, I'll have way more freedom in my life than I do right now. And so I think that perspective hopefully just helps the listener just understand, hey, this is a journey. Take your time with it. And actually, like, here's a crazy thought, maybe enjoy the process a little bit, and along the way, you might find that actually that fuels your freedom way more than any kind of gritting down and shaming would ever do. And so that'd be my biggest encouragement. I think this podcast is amazing. I think we're fortunate. Like, I think you, to be honest, Matt, you and a handful of other people, I think, really pioneered a new era of podcasters and content creators online. And I think we've all been very, I know I'm very fortunate to have been able to kind of just follow that wake. And so I think there are a lot of opportunities now for people to get content out there, and find places to, like, plug in and get help. And I highly recommend people do that as well. I think that'd be the other big piece of advice, is just don't do this thing on your own. Get other people involved and you won't regret it.
That's right. I love it. Yeah, I love that take. Man, we've all tried on our own, haven't we? It doesn't work.
Yeah.
Man, it doesn't work. But even if it did work, it's not duplicatable, and you can't tell someone what to do.
Yeah.
So much, because it's a battle. But rarely does it work. No, I love that take on freedom. What did you say? Freedom is a moment, sanctification is a process. Is that what you said?
Salvation is a moment,
Salvation is a
sanctification is a
moment.
lifetime.
All right.
Yeah,
It's a
that's the
lifetime.
quote. Yeah.
I like that. That's great. Yeah, I remember asking one of our guys, when are you free? Like, he had been free a few months, and he kept talking about my addiction, my addiction, my addiction. When are you free? He's like, oh, it's like maybe a year. Okay, so on day 365, you're not free, but on day 366, you are. He laughed. He got it. His lingo changed. The way he spoke changed. And all of a sudden, he's free. And
Yeah.
but he's not just free because he's out of porn. He's actually just walking in the freedom that already has existed. Like,
Yes.
we think we're freedom, or we think we're free because we're free of a behavior. When you look at, like, Christ set us free, that he's already done that. We're already in freedom, because when we're a slave, we literally have no choice. We are free because we have a choice to go to this. And that's really empowering to realize, I have a choice. Yeah, you have a choice. And so it's not just a little slip up or act out. It's like, no, you chose that. And that means you can also choose a different way. And so we are free, and sanctification is a process. Salvation is, say it again.
Yeah.
Salvation's a moment.
Salvation's a moment, and sanctification a lifetime.
Sanctification's a lifetime. There you go.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Sathiya, where can people find you?
deepcleancoaching.com has most of the information. The podcast is called Man Within. You've been on there before, and those are probably the easiest places to start. I highly recommend, if people want to check our stuff out, the podcast or the book. Those are always good places. You can access both of them for free at the website, and those are some great places for people to get a feel for what we're like. And then if you want to go deeper, there's lots of information on how to do that.
Awesome. Look Sathiya up on social media. The Last Relapse is behind him there. I highly recommend that.
Yeah, that's right.
And Sathiya, remember, I had that dream about you writing another book, so you got to write another one.
Yes. Oh, yes. I think about it all the time, actually. So we'll get there in due time.
Good. I love it. Thanks, bro. Awesome
Thanks for
stuff.
having me, man.
If you want to learn how Jesus-centered sexuality can transform your life like it has for so many people, remember to hit that subscribe button. And if you want help with porn or betrayal in your own life, look at the description below for options for your support.